today we'll be talking about what I've learned as a manager, especially and specifically what I can share from my mistakes and learnings when I became a manager for the first time. Let's get going. This is me at Zion National Park about a year ago. As you can see, I'm suited. I've got a backpack to preserve my belongings. I've got a walking stick, and I'm going to be hiking in the water, which has stones out there. Yet, despite everything, I lost my phone that day. I was complacent, I was overconfident, and while hiking, I tripped and I fell. And when you trip and fall, the first thing is you want to avoid embarrassment. So I got up like nothing happened, started walking. Moments later, I realized I dropped my phone in the water. Imagine that. A phone is very valuable nowadays, right? So do you have a moment, maybe let's put in the chat, where you've lost something very valuable to you, like a phone, wallet, or something else? I'd love to hear that. And this was a very learning moment for me. And I'll share why that is later in the presentation. Now I can I can resonate with that. I see here, Rahul, you lost your engagement ring, wife's engagement ring. Kevin, wow, drained before. I've got a phone going to the toilet as well. Oh boy, car keys is very common. Thank you for sharing, guys. Let's move on. Now, the first question I will ask you is, why should you listen to me? You guys don't know me, right? So my answer would be, you shouldn't. But as Rahul said, I worked at companies like this before: Oracle, Uber, Intuit, SAP, Netscope. And I've been in the tech career for 25 years. About 16, 17 have been as a manager. And today my goal is to share what I've learned as a manager, the mistakes I've made, with the goal being that you can learn from my mistakes and avoid making the same and have a wonderful career growth path in your career over the longer period. And as Warren Buffett says, it's good to learn from your mistakes. It's better to learn from other people's mistakes. And that is the goal of today's topic here. And what I've done over time, as Rahul mentioned, was I've distilled my learnings into a simple framework. And that framework is ABCs. But before we dive into that, a little bit of a backstory. Why did I become a manager? Back in about 2007, 2008, I was at Oracle and I was the lead engineer. And I was wondering what should be the next career path at that point of time. In those days, at Oracle, there were no levels beyond lead for on the IC path. It was either manager or continue as a lead. So I chose the manager path. Why? Because it seemed like I will get career growth to the manager path and grow on the senior manager and go beyond that. The second one was compensation. Managers tended to make more than the ICs. So that was my motivation to become a manager. Now, my management story at that point of time, this was in 2008. I started managing a team of 2 engineers. My 2 engineers were in India, while I was in California. And imagine that in 2007, 2008, there was no Zoom. So I was coordinating with my team via phone. It was like call meetings, and there was a 12 and a half or 13 and a half hour time difference. It was a lot of async after hour sync ups. And then also via chat. We had some internal chat tools to communicate and share information. But a lot of it, whenever I asked my team to do something, there used to be a gap of like 12 hours for them to get back and 12 hours to return and respond back to me. So it would be a whole 24-hour time difference. So that was the big challenge. And since I was a small team, I was still in IC at that point of time, supporting people in the US while my team was supporting in the India time zone. And as I mentioned, another reason was, okay, remember one of the things you might know, hey, why did I become a manager? Hey, maybe my manager doesn't know things. I could do this better. Now, another question for you guys. Do you ever think, hey, your manager doesn't know stuff, you can do this better? Things like that. That was a common thought. And that was why I became a manager. The challenge was I had no training at that point of time. I didn't know what it meant to be a manager. Suddenly, I was responsible for a team. And that is a different aspect of growth, right? Let's take a moment. If you ever thought on the stumps, you know better than your manager. Hey, I could do this very easily, Love to know your thoughts. Please comment in the chat. And Rahul, you're right. Many companies pay managers more than ICs at the same level. Completely agreed. And back 15, 20 years ago, it was still like that. Now, coming back to the ABCs of management. What is A? A is awareness. Awareness of what is expected of me as a manager. Second B is behaviors. How should I approach management? How should I show up here? And C, creating systems. How can I manage well as a manager? And I'll talk about all of these one after the other and share some stories along the way. So a little bit of a question, I want to take a pause here. And if people are managers or ICs, would love to hear your thoughts about management. Have you explored management as a career path or anything else? Please put in the chat. And we'll start with awareness here. What is the expectation as a manager here? What should I know as a manager? A manager is a role change, where initially you are just responsible for yourself, your work, and nothing else. Whereas as a manager, you're responsible for your team. And that is very different. You're responsible for the output of your team. And that can be very humbling suddenly, right? As I mentioned, my team was remote and I was still in that IC mode. So the first change that I had to encounter was it's about we, not I. I had to let go of that mindset of my work, and it had to change to our work. And initially, as my team was remote, it was a lot of IC work. But as my team grew, I got more team members. And I still studied the IC mode at that point of time. And that was very tricky for me. It was a significant mindset shift, a change in my thinking. And that doesn't come overnight, especially when you don't have training. It takes a bit of challenge. There's still even today that I jump into my IC mode trying to solve the problems that I could think like I know this better. But changing that mindset will take time, will take practice, and you've got to be intentional about changing your mindset and go to a team as opposed to me. A second very important aspect of management is delegate. You have to learn the art of delegation. As you move to a management role, the very first thing you will see is, hey, I can do this better than my team. I can do this task in say 3-4 hours, while my team member says it'll take them 3-4 days. And that's a big no-no. And why do you want to delegate? This will help you on 3 aspects. First is you want to build trust with your team. If you ask them to do certain work which you were doing and give them the guidance and coaching for it, that will help build the trust. Second, it will empower the team. And that's a very big tenet of having as a manager that you need to have as a manager is empower your team. And the third thing you will have is giving ownership to your team members. And you're showing that, hey, I'm willing to give ownership of something that I was doing to my team members. So, and that will help you to, as I said, build that trust with your team members. And management is a lot of trust. You need to be a guide and coach to your team, not like somebody who decides and micromanages your team. So that is a very important aspect of management, delegation. A third thing that I want to talk about is being vulnerable, admitting that I don't know and I made a mistake. As Brené Brown says, vulnerability is not about winning or losing. It's about having the courage to show up and be seen. And here we want to show up as being okay with making mistakes, with not knowing things. Back at Oracle, I changed roles. I started leading a different team. It was an enterprise product that we were working on, and I managed the team building the installers of the product. And I was coming from a role where I was knowledgeable expert. And I tried to show up my knowledge and guiding teams suddenly, hey, you should do the installer this way, that way, blah, blah, blah. And this was challenging. We were building the installers on multiple platforms, Windows, combinations of Linux, Unix, Solaris, and for like about 20 plus languages. And I messed up. And at that point, I realized my manager told me is, hey, you got to ask your team. They are the experts here, not you. And that was a light bulb moment. Hey, it's okay to ask my team. It's okay for me to not know everything and get some guidance from my team as well. Similarly, another example is in talking to team members. Sometimes, as you're a new manager, you're excited, your tone changes. And it tone sometimes is not received the same way that you think it might be perceived. And it's taken the negative aspect. At that point of time, I won't realize that I can apologize and accept in front of my team that I've made a mistake. So being vulnerable, this is something I will tell you, which might be provocative or people might not agree with. Vulnerability is a strength. It's not a weakness. Showing up as yourself, you're setting an example for your team. It's okay to go wrong sometimes, and it's safe. This is one aspect which will help you build psychological safety for your team. And that's very important in being a manager. So to summarize, this is awareness. First is we, not I. It's about the team, not about you anymore. Second is delegate. Third, be vulnerable. So here I want to take a pause here and see if people have questions, comments, and I can take an answer here. See a lot of questions here, Rahul.
One question from Ninad, which would love your thoughts on, Umang, is, are there companies that let you switch from management or to management from being a senior IC? So maybe just generalizing it, at what level would you recommend people start to explore management? Is there a minimum threshold of seniority on the IC ladder that you would want before people transition into management?
Oh, great question, Nina. Yeah, thank you, Rahul. Yeah, back in my day and what I've seen recently, if you're like a senior software at a staff level, I would suggest like at a staff level that you're looking as management as an alternative. By that time, as a staff, you've built up the technical know-how, you've led projects, you've mentored people, and that is where you will have a lot more exposure to try out management if you want. Because I don't know about leveling in the big tech that's like L6, L7. That for me, as if I look at it, a staff is equivalent to a manager or senior manager. And that's where you could switch your roles out there. Because as I mentioned, first thing, you're technically, you know the stuff. Second, you had exposure completing projects. And third, you've led your team members, mentored them. So you have the technical and people skills background to make a switch to management or experiment with that.
Yeah, makes sense. And maybe we can do another pause of questions after B. What do you
After
think?
B, absolutely, yeah. Thank you. Well, let's move on to B, behaviors. This is how do I show up as a manager? Again, this is very, very important. As I mentioned, this is the biggest mindset shift that you need. How do I show up? You have to change your thinking. You have to change your perspective here. And the very first aspect of behaviors is empathizing, being empathetic. As Roosevelt says, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And this is very, very important in terms of empathy. And what do I mean by empathy? The first thing is thinking about what the other person is thinking, putting yourself in their shoes. The biggest change I had to do here was I love to talk in team meetings, team settings. I had to learn to shut up and listen. The second part was I had to learn to be curious and ask questions. Questions of my team members. Why were they, not a why, sorry. Why is the bad question? What were they thinking about? How are they thinking about? So being curious and letting the other person speak and using your listening muscle helps really, really a lot in building that your empathy muscle. And as I mentioned earlier about psychological safety, showing vulnerability and empathy are the two core tenets of creating an environment of psychological safety for your team. That is what will allow them to do their best work, to express themselves and be themselves and share their ideas. That's where the best work will get done, in an environment of psychological safety with empathy and vulnerability. The second aspect of behavior is communicating. As this picture shows, a lot of blindfolded people are trying to touch an elephant. And if you ask them, you can describe an elephant, you will have different answers. Somebody might say looking at touching the tusk, which it's a pointed aspect. Elephant is pointed. Or somebody touching the back will say the elephant is pretty big. But the point that is being missed is you are missing to zoom out. There's a difference in communication between an IC and a manager. Then IC, you tend to go into details. The manager, you have to zoom out, as I mentioned. As an example, this communication aspect was really, really challenging for me. It was about a few years ago, I went into a meeting with my managers and senior managers, and they were asking me for updates. And here's how I went about giving an update for a project. Joe did this part A of this project. This is what he's working on. Peter is working on part B of this project. This is what he's working on, blah, blah, blah. And then Tom is working on this. I got literally stopped there. And the question that came to me is, I want to know the overall status of this project. And that was not a good moment for me. It sucked to be called upon like that. Here's a better way to provide a project update as an example. Project A is on track or off track, or you could use red, green, yellow. Second, this is what we've done, accomplished over the past week. Here's what we plan to do in the coming week. And here are the problems that we have encountered. Problem one, we have a solution for and we know how to resolve it. Problem two, we are blocked and we need your help with unblocking us. This is a more structured way of communicating. And that is a big change that you have to realize is communication is a concept that I've learned is chunking up, chunking down, and chunking laterally. That means communicating as per your audience. And communication has to be very impactful, has to be clear and concise. As a manager, communication is an absolutely critical skill for your growth and the team's growth. A very important aspect of managers is providing feedback. And here you might ask a few questions. And when I became a manager, the process was giving feedback only once a year at annual appraisal time. It felt like a punch at times. If things were good, great. But if things were bad, you're listening to some growth feedback only annually. Imagine how does that feel? And when I became a manager, I did the same thing. So I have a question for everybody here. How do you guys receive feedback? At what frequency? Is it yearly or every like 6 months? Please answer in the chat and I'll continue. The second aspect that I realized I was doing, I wanted to be nice to my team members, So I used something called ruinous empathy as described by Kim Scott in Radical Candor. I tried to sound nice in giving my feedback. I did not want to offend the person while I was giving feedback. And what happened as a result was my feedback was not impactful. Or I used the feedback sandwich. Say something good, in between twinkles something constructive, and again end with something good. That's the feedback sandwich. That like bite as well. But here is a better way to give feedback as a pinch. Give feedback early and give feedback often. Very likely after some event or during your weekly one-on-ones or whenever you have one-on-ones. Those are what is a good way to give feedback to your team members so that when the time comes for their annual feedback or appraisal, things are already known. So that's where the concept of pinch is really helpful versus a punch. A second aspect, praise in public. If your team has done really well, praise them in a public setting, in a meeting, team meeting, or in a group meeting, wherever you have, call it out in public. That will boost the morale a lot for your team. And correspondingly, if you have growth feedback, it has to be in private, mostly in your one-on-one setting. So that's where it's just you and the team member. And again, that as you're giving feedback, the best way to do it is you can start with say, hey, here, I want to give feedback. Are you okay to receive it now? So if you do it in a private setting and ask for permission before feedback, that will go a long way to make the person in a receptive mood, not in a defensive mood. And you can discuss, in a very safe environment about the feedback. And giving feedback for the right reasons is very important as a manager. Overall, I've learned feedback too should be direct, conveyed with empathy, and for the right intentions, which is growth of the team member. So summarizing the behaviors, first is empathy, communicate with impact, and feedback should be early and often. So let's take a pause here and ask questions. I think I saw some questions, Rahul. Rahul, any thoughts from your end, first of all, about the behaviors of management?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that really stuck out is the feedback you got when you were delivering the team update of like, John did this, Mary did this, etc. And I think it's so important to figure out what does your audience care about. Like the people, it sounds like the leadership team or the executive who you were presenting to, they didn't care about John, Mary, and Mark. They cared about, okay, what is the team delivering? How does it line up to our goals? And I think just having that understanding, or maybe even empathy, is like the word that you've been using, the empathy for what do people care about, and just making that easy for them, I think is such a core skill of a good manager.
Absolutely. Let me look at some questions. I think somewhere the questions.
Yeah, there is one question. Shashank, I think, has a good one. I think if I could just phrase it or summarize it, it's basically, okay, as a manager, you might be a strong IC and someone says, okay, you think that this task might take a day or two. But then someone on your team comes to you and says, hey, Umang, actually, I think this will take me 2 weeks to do. And you disagree with that assessment, right? You think that either they're just being lazy or maybe they're not approaching it in the right way, or like for whatever reason, you think it shouldn't take that long. How would you handle that? Like, how would you push back, or would you let them just take longer? How does, like, what are the nuances there?
I love that question, Rahul, and thank you for summarizing. Shashank, thank you for the question. That's what I was talking about, the curiosity aspect. You want to inquire with curiosity. What are they thinking about? Hey, what is the reason for this 2 week feedback? How have you broken the task? What are some challenges that you're seeing here that you're trying to be concerned about? And being curious and without asking why. First of all, let me tell you, if you ask why first, it'll become defensive. So you have to be empathetic and use different kinds of inquiring questions, curiosity based questions to understand where they're coming from. And that way you can, coach and guide them and lead them as to what you are seeing by gentle questioning, humble inquiry. That will help you get to the bottom of why they think it will take 2 weeks, whereas you're thinking about 2 days. So let them speak about it, hear them out, and then you can guide the conversation via how, what, which, whom kind of questions out there to see what they're thinking about. And great question. Now, do you want to add anything there?
No, I think that's great. I mean, I guess the thing I was going to add is that um, the what was the phrase you used? Like gentle, humble questioning. I think that's really
Yeah,
important because I
yes.
think it can often come across. I've had managers who are just they feel very aggressive. It's like they're antagonistic, and I think the way you're approaching it is much more, hey, we're literally on the same team. Like I'm literally on the team with you, and so that means that I want you to succeed. I want you to, I want both of us to succeed. And so that is why I'm questioning. I'm not questioning you to embarrass you or to put you down or to say, oh, you're such a slow or bad engineer. I think that underlying intention or empathy, again, I think is just so important for a good manager.
Absolutely great additions, Rahul. Thank you. Let me move on to C, and I'll take more questions along the way as well. The final piece of this puzzle, as I'm talking about, is creating systems. How do I manage? How do I manage well? When I became a manager for the first time, I had no idea about management. I had no idea about systems. And to literally put it was, I was winging it. I will tell you that. Who were my mentors and examples? Were the managers I'd worked with in the past, my current manager, and I was trying to follow whatever they tried to do. And it would work, it would not work. Because I didn't know the nuances between those systems, how they were following up, how they were doing things out there, right? So that's again a learning which I realized over time that I need to have my own systems of managing my team and my work and what should be the rhythm of it. So let's talk more about creating systems. The first aspect is planning. As Benjamin Franklin says, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. For the longest time, I went without a plan, be it for the teamwork, my growth, anything, it was without a plan. It was ad hoc. But here I want to take a step back. You have to think about the longer term plan for your team and for yourself, for your organization. There is an aspect of tactical versus strategic. For the longest time, I was focused on the tactical work for my team and for me. What is happening on a day-to-day basis? What is going to happen for the next week at the most? And the longest was a month. And that was a challenge out there because I was not thinking longer term. What happens with that? Without a longer term plan, you don't have a vision for your team. You don't have a vision for your team members also. You're not encouraging them to think about their growth. What do they want to achieve longer term? You want them to think about the organization. You want to build a consensus about where you want to go as a team in the longer term, just 6 months, 1 year, 3 years down the line. You have to got to be really strategic about what you're doing. I recently read a book by James Tanier about being a great engineering leader. And it talks about thinking in the longer term, not in the short term, but in the longer term. A lot of times, what we do is we patch something and forget about it, thinking it's good. But you've got to think in the longer term. The same goes for your team members. You should have one-on-ones weekly, bi-weekly, whatever the cadence is best for you. And have the team members think about what they want to do, how they want to approach things, what are their goals. You have to enable the team members to start thinking longer term, because that's where the growth will happen for the team members and the organization out there. Another aspect will be prioritization. A lot of times as a manager, you have to decide priorities and trade-offs about what will be done, what will not be done. Having a system to fall back on will make it easier for your team to know, hey, my manager will by default know the questions he or she will ask me. This is how I want to think about priorities and trade-offs. Because at the end of the day, the output of the team matters. That is why being strategic about planning for the longer term is very, very important here. A second aspect of management and creating a system for is managing stakeholders. The first thing is about identifying your stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? Could be the product people, could be the business people, could be the sales people, could be other teams, other developers. This is apart from your team and your manager. You really need to spend time and understanding who are the teams impacted by your work. So you've got to really identify that. The second aspect is developing a communication rhythm with your stakeholders. What does this mean? This is where you talk about the goals of your team, the achievements of your team, the milestones of the projects that they are achieving, and build a communication rhythm with your stakeholders. Hey, what are your delivery timelines? What are you looking at in terms of what would be the outcome that you'll be providing to your stakeholders? Why is this important? This is something which we talk about a lot in a different way. As an IC, we talk about, hey, you've got to promote yourself. You've got to be out there. You've got to build your brand. This is something I will tell you what you might not hear a lot. As a manager, it is my role to talk about and promote my team as a brand to other stakeholders within the company. Oh, why is this important? If I want a team member to grow, to be promoted, I need endorsements from people outside my team, outside my organization, as an example. And guess what? If my team members and my team have been visible to people in different businesses, different organizations, I can easily get endorsements for them and help you with the promotion. This is something you will really not hear about. I think people talk about themselves, but you need to brand your team, show your team out there, and focus on their achievements and what you are doing for the bigger company as in terms of output and outcomes. Now I want to take a pause here and talk about, see what thoughts you might have, other people might have, because this is something I've not heard a lot about, branding your team.
Yeah. I'm curious, anyone have thoughts here about um, communication rhythm and frequency for managers? You can feel free to unmute too. I think everyone here should have the ability to unmute themselves, or you can put it in the chat. So would love to hear from one person. Oh, and one thing I'll comment on is that at least at Meta, I mean, Umang, both you and I have worked at large companies, right? I think that one of the challenges is, to your point, like who even might care about this project, right?
Yes,
At a company like Meta, you have, okay, I'm going to make this small change, and then you don't even realize there's like 5 teams that are relying on the legacy behavior of that, which you thought no one cared about. And then you only find out when something breaks, or when in code review, someone's like, oh, actually, this is all wrong. You can't do this, or, other people are relying on it. So I think that's actually quite a big challenge in a large tech company.
I completely agree out there. Yeah. But this is something you really, as a manager, it is your role to consider this. Let me move on. A final piece of managing stakeholders is managing up. You've got to manage your manager and also your skip levels, ideally. But let's talk about managing up. In a couple of my roles in the past, I did not manage up well. I was in my cocoon talking to my team. I did not convey information up to my manager. And that posed a problem. It was a failure on my part. My manager didn't know what my team was doing, what if things were on track or behind track. And a lot of times it came as a surprise to my manager. And imagine his or shock. What? We are behind schedule on this? Why didn't you tell me that? In terms of managing up, as a manager, you've got to make your manager your ally. Your manager should not have surprises. This is somebody who's representing your team in different forums at their level or higher levels up where you might not have visibility. That is very, very important. Again, I talked about in terms of promotions for the team members. What do you think is will help you support that? It's your manager. They will be the people talking to people higher up in the chain. Conversely, if you have challenges with your team or a team member and you need help, who do you go to first? Your manager. So you want to ensure that this relationship is really, really healthy and your manager is your ally and not somebody who is against you. So spend time in cultivating and building this relationship. One way to do this is checking with your manager. Hey, how would you like to be managed? It's a simple question to ask. How would you like communications about my team, my projects? Just simple questions like that and following up on that at a regular cadence will really, really go a long way. A final piece of the puzzle for C today is continue to evolve as a leader. Leadership is not a one and done thing. As I mentioned back when I became a manager, it was a very different landscape. There was no Zoom. Today, Zoom is all over the place. You do Google Meet. So you need to continue learning. What are some ways to learn? As I mentioned, I didn't have a lot of training or mentoring at that point of time. My manager was my default mentor. But nowadays, you can go out and get mentors from other organizations. Even outside, there are services available like Mentor Cruise and Plateau. Or you can work with the coach, who is somebody who can be your sounding board and help you out with things that you might not even be aware of, or you might have blind spots. A second aspect I've realized is building a support network. Management can be challenging, can be lonely, and can be stressful. So I have a support network and a personal board of advisors. Today, my personal board of advisors are the managers who I worked with in the past and who I really got along well with. If I have a question or a concern, I go to them because there are different levels now. And that's very, very helpful, especially when you are struggling or you have a challenge. I would definitely suggest building your support network and your board of advisors. A third way to learn, as Rahul mentioned, nowadays there are a lot of courses available, a lot of books are available, and that courses you will help you learn about things, systems that other people are using. And by another advantage will be you'll get a support network while the course is happening, and you can build your network like that as well. There are a lot of books that will help you as well, too, in terms of learning about management and other challenges. Just to recap again, as I mentioned, creating systems is about planning, managing stakeholders, and continuing to evolve as a leader. So let me take a pause here. The ABCs are done, and I have some other things to go over, but let's see. More questions, comments, Rahul.
Yeah, there's actually a lot that came in. One that I like from Paul a lot. I'm not sure if Paul is able to unmute, but I'll invite Paul to go ahead and unmute and ask the question if he's able to.
Oh, hi. Thanks for being a big fan of yours and really enjoying Taro. So my question is, as your tenure as a manager lengthens and you're farther and farther away from writing code and writing design docs, how do you stay in tune with having the right sense of the feasibility and optimality of technical designs, as well as timelines of how fast projects can be done? Do you get that sense mostly from having one-on-one conversations with your ICs and with the tech leads? Or is it
Paul, great question. Thank you for asking this. And you're right, I've been away from this for a long time. So obviously, one way is, as you mentioned, talking to your ICs and tech leads. The second way, as I mentioned, is continuous learning. I also have to do my studies and learning as new technologies have evolved and come over, right? I need to continue learning on my own as well. Talk to my peers along the way, not just the team members, but keeping in tune with what are the technical aspects. I don't code, but I have to be technical in the sense that, okay, I participate in design reviews. I participate in reviewing documents out there as well, not just talking to them, but doing my own learning on the side and looking at what trends are out there. So that has been very, very helpful, because if you rely on your team leads and ICs, there is a challenge that you might get biased. You want to have an unbiased view of your own. And the idea is to form your own opinion out there, so that you are making an informed decision, not just like a one-way decision that you're coming only from your team members. You want to balance it out with what you know, what other peers at your level might be knowing. So you have to balance it out that way, Paul. But a great question. You want to have an overall 360 view about it before you commit to timelines and technical challenges. Definitely be curious from your team, but form your own opinion is what I would suggest.
Thanks. I have a follow-up question.
Yes.
So from my experience, the line managers, so managers and sometimes senior managers, when I have one-on-one with, they tend to be my direct managers. And when I have conversation with them, they can pretty, in general, very well engage in technical conversation. But skip managers such as director level and senior director level, sometimes I find the technical conversation to be unsatisfying because they don't know either much detail about the project or much detail about the technology, tech stack. So when I find this unsatisfying, is it because as an IC, I engage in too low level of a conversation, or is it something that's maybe I guess the skip levels, they need to kind of improve their understanding a little bit, for the lack of better phrasing. Yeah.
No, I love that question too. That's one of the questions I also had. As a manager, I used to go into details. But imagine this, as I said, empathy comes both ways, right? You're asking one side is, okay, can they be in my shoes? But I'll answer the flip way. Can you put yourself in their shoes? They're about 2, 3 levels up. So they are looking at just not your team's projects, but they have multiple teams very likely in their project. They're looking at from a business perspective. So they are looking at like a 30,000 foot view, while you're probably looking at like a 3,000 foot view, right? You into the details about how to accomplish the project, the details about the projects. Those, as you go higher up, you go away from the day-to-day tech and technologies, but they go more as an, okay, what is the outcome at the business level? What are the things that are coming up next that we can think in terms about the revenue or the growth of a product? So they will not be in the minutia, as you mentioned, but they have to look at it like at a very higher level, at a multiple team level or a multiple organization level, which is very different for them. So they don't get to the nitty-gritty details like a line manager you might be thinking about it, but they are used, okay, what it's a very longer term thinking also. What can be achieved in the next year, 3 years? So that's the goal that they are looking at. So it's a different perspective out there, Paul. They will definitely not know the day-to-day events of things, but they are looking at a longer horizon and what can be achieved at that level. And they trust you guys to make the decisions from a technology perspective or the detailed perspective. So that's the difference. One way, Paul, I can answer there, that
Got it.
their view is very different at that level.
Got it. Thanks. Yep.
Thanks, Paul. One question I would like to ask, which was asked, I think by Prashant, I forget by who, but someone. And then after that, maybe Dylan, I'll ask him to unmute after this next question. But the question I wanted to ask Umang was about skip levels, exactly what we're talking about. What is your view on that? Like, as a manager, do you encourage your team to frequently, and how frequently, to talk to the skip level? And do you get nervous of, oh, they might be talking about some shortcoming of me as a manager? Like, how do you think about the role of skip level meetings in for your team?
No, great question. A lot of my teams, I've encouraged having skip level meetings, but a lot of them, as you mentioned, for the right reasons, Rahul, they're afraid of the skip levels. And I'll talk about myself. In my current role, my skip level, when I started in the company, was the CTO. The CTO didn't have time. I wanted to meet him, but I didn't get a chance to meet him. But now my skip level is a VP. What I personally do is I meet my VP once a month. And that has been great because it gives me the opportunity to present what my team is doing and what are some of our goals, challenges that we are going through. And that has been very helpful. So at least my VP is now tuned into what my team is doing, and I have a forum to talk about my team's achievements. Coming back to my team, I really encourage people to talk to their skip levels at least once a quarter. Why? They will get to know you personally, at least they will know what you're working on. And second, the reason I ask them what their challenges are. What are the things that they are looking at? What is the perspective that they have about the work that your team is doing? Maybe you might be doing, might not be, they might not be aware of it, but what are their thoughts about the longer term for their team, for the organization? And as I said, flipping the shoes, think about their views, and that will also help you think longer term. So again, this comes into as two aspects about your growth and your longer term thinking, and what that you know the team is thinking about at the organization level. Sorry, I forgot. The organization is thinking at the longer term level. That's what you want to talk about. And if you want your growth, having that perspective will also encourage you to think about longer term. So definitely, I would encourage people to do skip levels at least quarterly, if not at least a couple times a year, depending on the bandwidth and availability and what level the skip level is at.
That's great. Dylan has a great question. Dylan, if you're able to unmute, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is around like I like in the past I've known managers that you know they kind of take some of the like the idea you're talking about here of the managers like the representative for the team, they're supposed to advocate for them and kind of talk about all the like you know the wins of the team. But sometimes I don't know if you'd call it a failure mode, but it seems like a failure mode to me that I've seen is that the majority of that like team advocacy or that kudos just happens in like you know a quarterly like planning or just like a department meeting where there's just a kudos section set aside of people are essentially allowed to give kudos to anyone else, and it usually ends up just being each manager goes and says my team's doing great because of this, and it oftentimes feels less meaningful because just everyone's giving kudos about their team, so it's not like significant or special or meaningful, and usually it's the part of the meeting everyone tunes out for because it's just not that engaging, I guess. And so I guess my question is, have you seen that scenario, and do you have any thoughts on like how to give kudos without them being just kind of meaningless, I guess, like how to really give kudos as a manager to represent your team well and advocate for them without it just kind of being fluff, I guess.
No, Dylan, great question. And I have seen that, and that typically happens, as I said, at the end of quarter or a half or at the end of the year. Hey, this is the list of achievements, blah, blah, blah. This is what we're doing. One way I've noticed, which is different and which I've also done, is don't wait for the quarter end. Do it when you achieve a significant milestone. And call it out right then. So it could be middle of the quarter, any month. If you're achieving a significant milestone, a significant outcome, which has a change in revenue or something of that sort, sharing that when it has happened is really, really impactful. As I was mentioning, praise in public, if you have a forum like that, call it out at that point of time. And there might be some things like in our company right now, we have like monthly meetings, all hands along the way, monthly, not quarterly, but monthly. Or some, you might have an all hands meeting, which is not again at a regular frequency. Those are forums where you can call out all these achievements and not wait when everybody's trying to call that out. So if you have more frequency, I definitely encourage calling it out as and when it has happened. Don't wait till the end. And that will help a lot and not sound as fluff, Dylan. That's one way of calling it out, as what I have done. If you have a regular cadence meeting, or send a specific note in your Slack channels or your some meeting forums which are very ad hoc via email, call it out at that point of time. But you're right, if everybody's calling at the same time, and just I think people tune out. You're right. So it's up to me as a manager to send a separate note or call it out at a different cadence to make it visible to everybody. Did that answer
Yeah.
your question, Dylan?
Yeah, that's helpful. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please.
So I like that a lot, but I think sometimes what I've seen is kind of you get now all the managers doing that, and you kind of get just Slack channels or email chains that are just full of, they become the kudos channel, and you kind of get the
Yes.
same scenario.
Mhm.
And I kind of wonder if maybe it's like an audience thing of like, the kudos should be directed towards maybe like their management as opposed to everyone. But also you kind of mentioned like it's good to kind of share the kudos broader. I don't know. I guess your thoughts on when that transitions into just do the quarterly ones, but it's now just a Slack channel that kind of gets filled with this kind of stuff. Have you seen that, and any thoughts on that?
Yes, I have seen the kudos channel, and then kudos, everybody jumps on the bandwagon, congratulations, and you don't know what happened there. Like you suddenly get lost out there. Another way we've done is, you might have seen, like, there are a couple of other things, people getting awards. Typically, we have quarterly awards also sometimes, then depending on the company organization. That was another way I've seen, like, okay, if some team is, you might have a lot of teams, but then calling out certain teams which have done really, really impactful work in a different way. That is one other way. But otherwise, the regular fluff is calling it out in a Slack channel, or sending a note specifically about it. Apart from the regular aspects, the kudos channel is definitely not a one way, which I've seen. But the impactful way is, and kind of like as an example, I'll give you in my previous role, there used to be weekly meetings. Every week we had meetings for a bigger organization. So that is where calling out really helped. Hey, you achieved something. So that it's not always at the quarter end. Kudos channel was obviously there, so you called it out there, but it's a bigger audience. And the second thing is, we had something like a newsletter going out. So the newsletter used to be at a monthly cadence, and you called out your achievements in the monthly newsletter. And that was very, very in time, right? Just in time kind of achievement. Hey, this team achieved something in the last month as part of their goal setting. These are some other ways you can call out your accomplishments without all the time sounding at this fluff, right? Because not every team will achieve everything at the same time. So if you have a monthly cadence as a newsletter or some other meeting which is more frequent, calling it out that way has been really helpful. The other thing I have done also now, which I do, is I have my meetings with my skip level as an example, right? I call out my achievements there, at least so the right people have visibility there. That's what I do. So that's one way, again, to make sure the real stakeholders are aware of your team's achievements. As a manager, nothing is stopping me from setting up a meeting with my stakeholders and demonstrating the accomplishments of my team. Or you can send what I've done in the past is sent an email about my team's achievements at a different cadence. I've set up a meeting with my skip level and the stakeholders to just talk about the progress of my teams and milestones. And those are some other ways that you can also take a proactive approach as a manager to call about your team's accomplishments and not try to sound it as fluff, where in a way where everybody's doing the same thing. Does that help, Dylan? It's a
Yeah,
tricky
that's
question
great.
to answer. But
Yeah, that's
as
helpful. Thank you
I have
so
some
much.
things in my armor that I can do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let me move on for a moment. I've got a couple of things. I spoke about the ABCs. And let me tell you why I speak about the ABCs. This is my coach, Pramoda Vyasa Rao. He talks about performance is equal to potential minus interference. The goal of this ABC is to reduce the interference. Now, interference can be personal interference, organizational process interference, or situational interference. My goal as a manager is to maximize the potential of the team member so that the team can achieve the highest performance. At the end of the day, a manager's and the team's goal is to have great outcomes as a team that are impactful to the organization. And to achieve that, my role as a manager, it is to reduce that interference. And again, as I mentioned, it's all about the team at this point. So that's why my idea of using the ABCs to maximize the performance through the potential of my team so that we can achieve high performance and become a high performing team. Well, coming back to my management story, I've asked, I think there are a couple of questions, or let me come back to that. My before picture was I was always thinking about my growth. My communication was poor. I was afraid of giving feedback. I wasn't planning, and I was stressed and burnt out. But since then, the biggest mindset shift has been our growth, the team's growth, the team members' growth, having impactful communication, having a framework for giving confident feedback, and being intentional and strategic about the priorities, the work being done, the planning aspect of things. And this has led to me enjoying management a lot more now as opposed to getting stressed out. Let me share some resources that I've done. I've taken some courses through the Maven platform by Dave Klein. He and his wife Marston run a lot of fantastic courses on management. For communication, I had a course by Pramoda Vyasa Rao, and Ali Merchant is another person whose courses I'm taking about creating systems for management. Taro also has some wonderful courses. Ryan has a course on communication. So does Alex. Alex has a course about asking questions. Ethan Evans, everybody might know, is about managing up. And there is one aspect which I didn't cover was about hiring. And there's a course by John Egan on the Tara platform. How do you hire great engineers? When it comes to books, I have a ton of references here. One book, if I might recommend, would be in a very different vein is Marshall Goldsmith's What Got You Here Won't Get You There. You have to really think about management in a different perspective from an IC role. That's one book. There are a lot of other books that I'm sharing which can help you become a great manager and how to build your team. I also have some books about communication. And one of the topics I spoke about was Ruinous Empathy, which is in Radical Candor by Kim Scott. A manager is also supposed to be a coach. Now, when you become a manager, you don't know what coaching is. And there's a book called The Coaching Habit, which can help you with how to think about and ask questions like a coach. Let me end the story. Meanwhile, back in Zion, as I mentioned, I lost my phone. Why did I lose my phone? You can see the zipper pocket at the top. I put my phone there. So it was not fully in. As I fell, because of that, my phone fell. Now, when airlines and when you're flying planes, you will see that, okay, you got to wear an oxygen mask yourself before you start helping out. Now, the fun thing I did was I had a backpack to store my phone. I put my friend's phone in there while my phone was here. So as I fell, the phone fell. But after I lost the phone, my friends obviously helped me to find the phone. Didn't work out. There was no coverage out there. As we got out of the hike, I called my wife and said, hey, I lost my phone. Do you want to erase my phone? And she did a smart thing. She told me that let's not erase the phone. Let's mark the phone as lost and put her number there to contact. And a strange thing happened. A couple of days later, as I flew back to San Francisco, as after I landed at the airport, my wife called me and said, hey, they found your phone. And I was shocked. How did they even find the phone? It happens that a couple the next morning while they were hiking found my phone. They gave it to the park. The park ranger saw the phone number and called my wife, and I got the phone. Surprise, surprise. The phone had some damage, visual damage out there, but then it was in good shape. I still have the phone with me as a remembrance out there as to what happened here. Now, why am I sharing this story? As a manager, there are a lot of uncertainties. You will try to avoid mistakes. You will have the coverages. I had all my backpack and everything, but still things might go wrong and things will become uncertain. But what can you do at that point of time? As I mentioned, you have your support network, you get guidance, you get help, and you try to address that challenge. In my case, a little help created luck and this had a happy ending. But there are times when I made mistakes and the ending was not happy. But what I learned from that mistake is what I tried to share today. That, hey, I hope that you can learn from my mistakes and you avoid those mistakes and have a good path career growth as a manager. Add to this, Rahul just started a Eng Management Slack channel on Taro. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out there. I want to acknowledge Taro for this opportunity to present to everybody. Rosie created a wonderful picture for my event. Rahul and Alex gave me great feedback on the slide deck. Pramoda Vyasarao is my coach, as I mentioned, and he helped me with prepare for this slide deck and talk. And I want to thank my family who've been through thick and thin through me while I was making mistakes out there. So thank you, everybody.